My name is Maria Juarez, and you're listening to In This Casa. Bienvenidos. In this podcast, I aim to memorialize and honor my husband David's memory by exploring conversations about life and what it's like in my casa, and hopefully in other casas as well. Welcome back to In This Casa, and thank you for joining me. In this episode, we're going to talk about specifically the grief of losing a spouse. I didn't make an episode last week, and today's Thursday of this week, and it's taken me this long to record the episode for this Saturday because for the past 2 weeks, I have struggled to not cry when I talk about David. And even right now, I don't think I'm going to be successful in recording this episode and talking about him without crying. That's not something that's always consistent over the past almost 14 months. It'll be 14 months in 2 days. But for the past 2 weeks, I'm finding that I'm just really emotional about when it comes to speaking about him. And usually I'm stronger, or I feel like I'm usually stronger than this at that. I wanted to talk about it because I think that, I don't know if it's in my head or if it's something that I'm getting, like an implied message that I'm getting, or maybe not even implied. Sometimes it's absolutely direct message I'm getting from family and friends in regards to how I'm doing adjusting on this current timeline, right? So we're about to hit 14 months, like I said, since my husband died. And I'm not saying that I don't feel like my family and my friends aren't supportive and aren't understanding, because they are. And even when they're not, they are trying to be. I can see the intention. I can feel the intention. I can see the love, and I can feel the love. And I try to be mindful of that because the whole situation's hard. You know, I've mentioned before that, like, I understand, how are they supposed to know what to say to me? And now I don't even know what to say to myself. So, like, I get it. It's not easy. So because of that, when people say things to me, I try to be understanding and I try not to get angry or upset about what they're saying. But I do try to respond with educating them about what they're saying, how that can impact somebody who is grieving, or just specifically about how that's impacting me, how I'm receiving it, and set my boundaries and expectations with that person based on what it was they said to me. So to give you an example, what I mean is, like, recently I had a friend who's been a friend of mine for a long time, decades. And they mentioned to me that we were having a conversation kind of about how much I'm home. And they mentioned to me that life has to go on at some point. And I didn't get upset because I understand why a person who has not experienced the loss that I'm experiencing can just kind of casually and callously say, life has to go on at some point. They didn't mean it callously. They were trying to be encouraging and trying to help me, I don't know, move forward or move on, or I don't know. I think it was meant to be a positive gesture, but that's not how somebody in my situation, I would assume, or that's not how I internalize it, being told that life has to go on at some point. Because I think that, sorry, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think that people think it's time for me to get back to normal, I guess, to be the person who I was when my husband was still with me on this earth, because it's been long enough, right? So I think that what people think, and they don't mean to think this, and I could be totally analyzing and receiving this wrong, but what it feels like to me is that people have an expectation that at some point, right, especially after a year, like, wow, he's been gone for a year, you've been grieving for a year. It's been a long time. Life needs to move on. Life's going to move on, like, you know. And so they're either upset or concerned that I'm not in that space, because they're ready for me to be my old self again. And I'll never be my old self again. I'm not the same person that I was 14 months ago. And 14 years before that, I was a completely different person because I hadn't yet met David. And meeting David changed my life. It changed who I was. He was my partner and the love of my life. And I was a happier person after I met him. I was so much more happy. I was more myself with and because of him. I laughed a lot. We laughed every day, all the time. And even before meeting him, I have mentioned on here before that I'm a very serious person. I was a very serious person. The people who are super close to me know that I'm playful and silly and funny and things like that. But I'm not, it takes a lot to bring that out of me. And David easily brought all of those things out in me and made it easy for me to be myself and be happy. And he's not here anymore. So I don't have his presence, his energy, his love, his companionship, all those things that created that happiness in me are not here. And there's not a way to replace them. So I cannot be who I was. And I'm struggling to figure out who I am now and who I'm going to be. And I think that that's partly because I'm reluctant to do it, right? I don't want to be somebody other than who I was 14 months ago. I want to be that person. And I want to have my person. And I can't have him. And I'm being forced to adjust and figure out who I am now. And maybe for some people, this is like a super easy transition and adjustment. And if that's the case, that's amazing. I'm amazed by that. And I think that that's really fortunate for that person. But for me, that's just not been my experience. So I wanted to mention this research questionnaire that these two psychologists did to measure how much certain life events changed a person's life. They wanted to understand what are life's most stressful events and the impact of stressful events on life by answering questions about how your life has changed and rating it on a scale. They were going to try to quantify what is life's most stressful event. And so the source of this particular research is the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, and it's by T.H. Holmes and R.H. Ray, and it was done in 1967. And I found it because it was shared by Whitney Allen on Instagram. And Whitney mentioned a disclaimer that, she's not categorizing the death of a spouse or life partner as the most stressful life event. She's just simply sharing the information. And so I want to reiterate the same thing, that I'm not saying that my loss of David is more stressful than anybody else's events. But I want to try to give some insight into why it's so difficult for me to move forward and adjust to living without my husband. So I want to start with this particular chart. And in their chart, they did end up rating or finding out that people rated the death of a spouse as being 100% the most stressful event, or the most stressful life event that somebody could have. And I'm going to talk about the reasons why in a minute. Very close behind it, like 30 points behind it on a scale of 100, is divorce. And I have gotten that a lot in the conversations about losing David. I've gotten a lot of people who are divorced or have been divorced, and they are relating the loss of their spouse through a divorce to the loss of my spouse. And I don't want to discount the emotional, traumatic, physical, mental stress and effects of a divorce or a partnership separation. Maybe not legally married, but, people who are together and they separate within their lifetime. The difference I've explained to my family members who have related their divorce to my loss is I try to be very careful and very delicate because I don't want to trivialize anybody's journey. Everybody's feelings are valid and everybody's journey is valid. It's their journey. But the difference between a divorce and the way that I lost my husband is that when you have a divorce, there are usually negative events that have happened or occurred in your relationship that have led up to the divorce or the separation. And those negative events start to harden your heart or build a wall. You start to emotionally disconnect. You start to prepare yourself for the divorce or the separation. And I mean, I understand that in some cases divorces come out of nowhere and separations come out of nowhere. But a lot of times divorces and separations are things that you see them coming, right? And you plan them. You have to like hire an attorney and things like that. So there is a difference in how I lost my husband, because that Saturday morning we woke up and we had plans for the day, errands to run, things to do, plans for the evening. And we woke up a married couple in love, sharing a life. And David left the house before me that morning. And when he left the house, he walked to my side of the bed as usual and gave me a kiss and said, "I love you," before he left the house. And I kissed him and said, "I love you back." And he died that day unexpectedly. So the only trauma or turmoil or negative events that happened were his accident, his death. We were perfectly fine in our relationship and happy. So it's different than a divorce. But yes, a divorce, a marital separation, a partnership separation, those things for sure, extremely stressful life events. Per this chart, the death of a spouse is a little bit more stressful, and I'm gonna talk through why they think that. Also, the death of a close family member comes right behind divorce and separation. I mean, like within 1 or 2 points. So death, separation, yes, those things are all extremely stressful. Either way, they all fall above the 50 percentile impactfulness in regards to the stress on somebody's life. But to lose a spouse or your life partner is a little different. But I want to talk through what the conversation in this particular article was about, how the death of a spouse or a life partner is different, and how it was rated number 1 on the Social Readjustment Rating Scale. So the stress of losing a spouse is so high that it can actually increase the surviving partner's chances of death and the development of serious medical illnesses, according to a 2020 study from the Journal of Frontiers in Psychology. So I know that I'm referencing a 1967 set of research, a scale that was created in 1967, but that information still aligns with a study done in 2020, just 3 or 4 years ago. So it's still relevant today. The study also found that the loss of a life partner is associated with increased rates of inflammation, decreased immune health, and increased signs of biological aging. So there's some comments in here that I think that Whitney Allen added, and I want to read them because when I saw this post of hers, I felt like it explained very well in words what I am failing to be able to explain to my family members and my friends about why I'm having such a hard time in my grief journey with the loss of my husband. So it says, a spouse or partner is intertwined with everything in a person's life and how they operate on a day-to-day basis. From rituals and routines, family traditions, and daily tasks and chores, there is very little that your spouse is not involved in. When a partner dies, the surviving spouse loses all sense of structure and purpose. Every activity of daily living is a reminder that your person is gone. Their death touches everything. You are often dependent on a spouse. From financial responsibility, co-parenting, and household chores, partners share the daily mental and physical load of life. When a spouse dies, the surviving spouse becomes solely responsible to keep everything going while also grieving. Often, a spouse dying results in a complete or significant loss of income, medical benefits, etc. There is no other relationship in your life where you build a life with someone. You share a life with a partner or spouse. You've shared a history and you're also making plans for a future. The death of a spouse is so jarring because the surviving spouse is often left not knowing what the present or future will look like, because the life you built with somebody ceases to exist when your person dies. The secondary losses and fallout from the loss of a spouse are far-reaching. The death of a spouse causes changes in family dynamics and friendships. It can also have a huge impact to a surviving spouse's confidence and sense of self and identity. A spouse's death is also associated with extreme loneliness when you're used to sharing a life and physical environment with someone. Because the death of a spouse touches everything, a surviving spouse is tasked with building an entirely new life from scratch. This often is associated with a lot of transitions and changes that others do not have to make, which can cause criticism and judgment as it can activate other people's grief. So after I read this post by Whitney, I made a note to myself that what I'm feeling like is that no one understands that David and I were one. Our lives were one, and everything in every moment was shared and supported by each other. I've lost that, and every second is a reminder. So I want to talk about all the things that I do in a day without him now that remind me that he's gone. So that way I can try to explain my mental process throughout the day that continues to make it difficult for me to adjust to the situation. So I want to reference first another post that I did see on Instagram by I'm Natasha Smith. And the post says 7 things grievers may think about daily. So the number 1 is memories of our loved one. Number 2 is what if thoughts. Number 3 is how to get through the day. Number 4 is emotional triggers. Number 5 is guilt or regret. Number 6 is concern for others grieving. And number 7 is imagining life without them. And I don't know that I think about all of those things daily, but I think it's a good start, and it's a good example of things that are going on in someone's head, right? When they're grieving, when they've lost a loved one. Okay, so I'm gonna walk through what my day's like. And if you've watched my previous episodes, you know that I own a salon with my sister and her best friend. So my schedule is different. I no longer work in a corporate job, so there's flexibility in my schedule. Okay, so I want to start when I wake up, except the problem is that I don't sleep well either. So I kind of want to start at night because that affects my morning. So I'm asleep, I'm trying to sleep. And when I go to sleep, it takes me a long time to go to sleep because I'm in bed by myself without David. And I'm used to his body being there. And I would always fall asleep before David. And so he would lay on his side of the bed, on his back, watching TV, and also on his phone playing Call of Duty or watching a video or, I don't know, something. And I would lay down and I would get all cuddled up on his right side and just fit myself into all his nooks in the same way every night. And he would, in between his games, he would scratch my head and I would fall asleep we would always joke that within 30 seconds I was asleep. So now I can't fall asleep because I'm in the bed by myself. And then I fall asleep and I wake up all night long. I usually wake up around 2:30 and I wake up again around 4:30. Not to mention that I'm just tossing and turning all night, but those times I usually wake up and I'm up. But when I wake up, I always had a hard time sleeping. So when I would wake up in the middle of the night, I would always turn around and hug David, or he would turn around and hug me. And now when I wake up, that doesn't happen, right? There's no one to hug. There's no one to hug me. And I want to jump in real quick and say that I understand that may sound just like I'm lonely, but I want to preemptively say that all the things that I'm mentioning that I have experience without my husband, there's no replacing him. It's not just a body. It's not just a man, a person. It's not just anyone that I am wanting. I don't want anyone else to lay in my bed with me. I want my husband. I don't want anyone else to roll over and hug me or to scratch my head before I go to bed. I want my husband. So that's part of the problem, right? Is that I can't get that, and there's no replacing it. Okay, so then I wake up in the morning. It's 6:30 now, and Raven needs to go out. So I get up to let her out, which automatically reminds me that David's not there because David used to get up and let her out, not me. So I get her up, I let her out, and then I bring her back in and I feed her, which also reminds me that he's not here because David always fed her in the morning. And I get a cup of coffee started, but only 1 cup. I come into my room. I need to get dressed for the day. I go into my closet. My closet faces David's closet. So I see his closet, which stays closed all the time. And then I get dressed for the day. Today, I left the house to go get coffee and to wash my car and to go by the cemetery and see my husband for a little bit this morning. And when I leave the house, when one of us would leave, whichever one would leave, they would make sure that they went over to the other one and said, I love you, and give them a kiss. And then the other one would give them a kiss and say, I love you. We always did that when we were leaving the house. So I leave the house and there's no one to tell. I do have David's picture near my front door. His ofrenda is still there. It's permanently there. So I do talk to him. I do tell him that I'm leaving for the day and that I love him as I leave. But I'm just talking to his picture. So that reminds me that he's not here. I get in the car and the car needs gas. Which reminds me that David's not here because I was spoiled and David always put gas in my car for me. I really think there was very few times in those 13 years that I pumped gas in my own car. So I got to go put gas because he's not here. And then I go get coffee. And then I go to the cemetery. And then I go get my car washed. And then I come back home. And I come inside and I start to get to work. And if I was working at the salon or working at one of the companies that I used to work at before, once I got to work, I would text him, I'm at work, baby. I love you. I hope you have a good day. But there's no one to text. So I just start working. And then it's lunchtime. And so now I got to figure out what to eat. And I'm not hungry, but I got to eat something. So I decide I'm going to order Chipotle and pick it up because then I can eat it for half of it for lunch and then half of it for dinner. Because I'm going to have the same problem in the evening because he's not here. And I'm going to need to eat something. And I don't have a reason to cook because it's just me. So I'm trying to get ahead of that problem and feeling his absence again later in the evening and just having something that I can just heat up and eat when it's time to fuel myself. So I eat half of my food and then I get back to work. I text my daughters and check in with them. I text them on our group chat, our family group chat, which is me and them and David. And I know he's not going to respond ever. And then when I'm done working, normally I would let David know that I was done working and I loved him and I was headed home or whatever. But again, there's no one to tell. And then my evening happens. You know, I have to eat something, but I've taken care of that. So I just eat at the table by myself without my husband sitting in his chair, or I eat in my room. And then I feed Raven, which again reminds me that he's not here because he used to feed her. And then anything I do in the evening here at the house, you know, if I have to take out the trash. Today I have to roll the trash cans out for garbage to get picked up. David used to do that. Because, you know, I would be inside, like, you know, taking care of dinner. And he would, like, take out the trash and water the yard. And instead, I just order something for myself and don't cook, and I do his chores. And while I do his chores, I walk around my home and my yard and my property crying and sad that I'm doing his chores because he's not here to do them. And everybody thinks that that's therapeutic in some way. But I don't find it therapeutic to walk around and do the things that my husband used to be responsible in our family life for doing. I find it depressing. And the only reason I do it is because I know he would want me to. And wherever he is, I want him to be proud of me. And I want to, you know, represent him well in his absence, I guess. Then I go to bed. He's not there when I lay down, and it starts all over again. So that's not to mention, you know, anything else on any given day that could possibly come up that reminds me that he's not there. Maybe a light on my car comes on. So now I have to call the dealership and I have to make an appointment and I have to deal with that. And I have to either wait for a loaner car or I'm going to have to Uber because my husband's not there to drive me around and help me with that whole situation. And, you know, last week I had to pay the balance of Sarah's tuition for her fall quarter. And David's not here for me to talk about it with him. He's not here with me to help provide the finances. He's not here for me to just share that financial stress with. I'm doing it on my own without him. So it reminds me he's not here. Every time I go work at the salon, it reminds me that he's not here. This past weekend, we were at the salon, me and Amanda and Wendy and my brother-in-law Kevin and Wendy's husband Jesse, getting some things done that we needed to get done there. And, you know, the only person missing was David. It reminds me that he's not there. And even when I'm there, you know, him and I hung up the wallpaper. Him and the guys hung up our color racks. He's everywhere, you know. I had just left the salon the day that he died when I found out he was in an accident. So being there reminds me that he's not here. pulling up to my house and there being no cars in the driveway reminds me that he's not here because his car will never be here. And there are things that people say all day long that are not wrong. I mean, they're just them living their lives. But they remind me that he's not here because I can't relate to them anymore because my husband no longer exists in this world. So, for instance, I don't know, someone will say, I gotta go because my husband's waiting on me for dinner. I'm like, oh, okay, no worries. Go ahead. I got this. It's not their fault. They're saying something like that, and that's going to trigger me at all. So I don't respond like it is triggering because that's just a person living their life. But in my head, I think I used to have a husband that was expecting me to come home so we could have dinner. And now I don't. So it's just, everything all day long reminds me of David, which then reminds me that he's not here. And I don't know how I don't know how I'm supposed to adjust past that. I don't know how I'm supposed to not think about all those moments. Like, they say that the grief gets easier with time, or that it gets easier to carry. And I don't know what that means, because how is it easier to carry the thoughts of him not being here every second? I just don't understand what that means. Maybe my life will move forward one day. But even if my life moved forward, and let's say, for instance, I did find a new life partner, I don't believe that on special moments or holidays or just any given day in a practical or intimate moment with that partner, that I wouldn't think or remember about my husband and my life with him and those moments now being without him. And because of that, I'm for sure not in any way, shape, or form ready to move forward with my life. I don't think. I could be wrong, because I am doing things, like I work, I do this podcast, I do stuff. So maybe I am moving forward in a way that I can't recognize, because that's something for me that is just instinctually done. Like you keep moving, you keep working, you keep going. But I can't move on emotionally. There's no possibility of that. I had a family member ask me, don't I just want to have a friend so that I can go do stuff with and have fun? And I told them my husband was my best friend. So no, I don't want to just have a friend. There's not anybody that I can think of that I would want to put in that position in my life, because that would still feel like replacing my husband. I definitely don't want to have a romantic relationship with anybody, because again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form emotionally prepared to replace my husband. There's no replacing him. So losing David has been the most difficult thing that I have ever had to endure in my life to date. And it makes me sad, because I think that I'm going to endure this grief for the rest of my life. I don't think that there's any way to remedy it, ever. And I think that's indicative of a life event that would be the most stressful. Because in other life events, it may be easier to move forward and to adjust and to find joy again. If you're divorcing or you're separating, you may be open to a relationship sooner rather than later. Or to friendships and spending time with people. If you lose a loved one who's really, really close to you, or a family member who's really, really close to you, that's devastating. But you may not have planned a life as a partnership with them for the rest of your life. And so you don't lose that stability. You don't lose that identity. I feel like I think about it in a way that when I'm talking to somebody and they give me advice that I feel like is not relatable or not helpful or inconsiderate, and they don't mean it, I try to make sure that I evaluate the source. And what I mean by that is that, like, is the family member or the friend that I'm talking to, have they been married? Have they been divorced? Did they feel like the person they're married to is the love of their life? Have they been married and lost their partner? Like, can they actually relate to me and then they're giving me advice. So if I can't say, yes, this person was married for years, they loved their spouse, they lost their spouse, they understand what I'm going through, then I take their advice or their comments with a grain of salt. And so to that fact, I'm commenting on stress levels of life events, about things that I personally have not experienced myself either, right? Like divorce or separation of a partnership or marriage. I never experienced those things. So maybe I'm being callous about my analysis of what that life event would be like on somebody, the impact of it on somebody's life and their emotions. The only family members that I've lost are grandparents or tios, or, I lost my best friend a few years ago, but him and I hadn't spent a lot of time together in, the years leading up to that time. David for sure is the closest loss that I have endured. So maybe for sure I'm biased, but maybe my perspective is really skewed because I haven't lost other family members and I don't have a basis for comparison of losing somebody that close. Or maybe that just has to do with my personality, for not being an overly emotional, overly person who gets so emotionally connected and attached to people or things or events, or, I tend to be a realist. And so maybe up until now, something like this has just never really impacted me to my core, where other people are more empathetic and it has affected them more deeply. I don't know. But I just wanted to kind of talk through, from my perspective and my experience, what the grief of losing my life partner has been like. And I hope that it helps to give a little bit of insight into a situation like mine, where you may have a friend or a family member, loved one, who, loses their life partner and seem like they can't get over it. Like they can't get past it. Maybe this gives a little bit of insight into what's going on in their mind on a daily basis and why it's making it so difficult for them to adjust. Anyway, so if you've hung in there this long to the end of this episode, I know it was long. I appreciate you staying with me and having this conversation. And I appreciate you letting me cry and be emotional about it. And I hope you understand where I'm coming from, and I hope I haven't offended anyone in any way. But again, this is just my experience and my opinion, and I'm not an expert, and I'm just a human, and, sometimes I get shit wrong too. And maybe we can talk about that. Maybe next week you can come back on Saturday, and we can continue to talk about what it's like in my casa. And if you would like to talk about what it's like in your casa with me, send me an email. I'll talk to you soon.